Let me see that. Okay, and that's with, okay. Here are the objectives. I'm going to skip past that and let's get started with first of all, what AI is not, because this is often a confusion for a lot of people. So if you're used to using an Alexa device or you've seen chatbots, that's not AI. What that is somebody has anticipated every question you might possibly ask and they've written a response. And you've probably been familiar with that in Alexa, where you ask a question just slightly different way and it can't answer the question, certainly early on. That is not AI at all, because it's just a list of facts. And when you ask a question, it's looking up that list. And if there's no answer, it's not got a result. So that early stuff was often called AI. That's not AI at all. It's really important to remember that in the list of facts approach, because when people ask later on, oh, AI made a mistake, they're thinking about it as if it was a list of facts that it's going to look up an answer. That's not what's happening. If you've heard the word generative AI, that word generative in the front of it, that means it's making it up as it goes. And that may sound scary to you, but that's what all of us do. If I was to give this presentation a second time, I wouldn't use the same words. I'd have the same intent, but all the words would be slightly different. And that's a way of thinking about it. So when that first approach of trying to list all the possible questions anyone could ask was attempted, it wasn't very good. And so folks said, okay, that's not going to work. We've got to have a different approach to this. And so they came up with the idea of kind of mimicking the way the brain works and the synapses in the brain. And they said, we can't just have this big list of facts. We can't keep it up. And so they kind of programmatically in statistics created what was like an empty brain with all that ability to kind of wire up the synapses. And I'm not going to go too far into the clinical metaphors because I'll get myself in a lot of trouble. But kind of just going one step further, things as a children's hospital, the idea to think about kind of generative AI or this particular iteration is there's an empty brain when a child is born. That brain has got lots of capacity, but it's not yet being filled. And so what they tried to do with this kind of statistical brain was feed it a bunch of information. And so what actually the big breakthrough in 2020 was they were able to create this brain, but in 2020, they were able to actually speed read information into the brain. And the way I kind of think about it, probably an old school movie kind of idea. Have you seen those movies where someone flips through a book and then suddenly they have all the knowledge in their head? And think of it like that. They were flipping through books and this brain was just absorbing all this information from the internet. So that ability to read was really pretty critical. Now in 2022, when GPT-3 came out, the brain had been read so much information that suddenly it started to make sense. Now, you may think, well, version 3, what was version 2 like? Version 2 was only released to a few academics because it was so bad, right? You'd ask questions and it would give you crazy answers that didn't make any sense. But just magically in 2022, they kind of cracked the code in reading it enough information that they started to ask it questions, and now it just made sense. And so all of us heard of this concept, ChatGPT, which is really just a way to interact with the brain. So think about the brain as its own separate thing. That's that 3.0. And ChatGPT was just a way to talk to the brain. The way I often think about it, imagine someone in a dark room and you're just passing them notes under the door and then they pass you a note back. That's effectively what ChatGPT is to the brain. So you've seen these examples. I'm not going to spend too long. We played around here as write a guide for parents coping with a child who's had new diagnosis of diabetes at 5th grade leaving level in the style of Fred Flintstone. Well, no one's ever written that before. So you can't go to a database of facts to look it up. Alexa would have failed with that, but sure enough, it's able to come up and generate something that's accurate and in the style of Fred Flintstone. So another one we tried, because you guys may not do this, but I have to write a lot of hospital policies, and our policies are all written by many, many individuals over many, many years, so they never sound the same. They're all written in different voices. So we went through this experiment of taking all the policies and running them through a prompt and saying, rewrite these with an executive summary at a particular grade of reading and make it easy to read. And lo and behold, it's able to do that and summarize that information. And then the last one, maybe a little closer to home for you guys, is imagine you're an emergency room physician, summarize the medical history of the patient below using bullet points, and we fed it 15 or so pages of medical history, and sure enough, it's able to do that and make it easily readable. So for somebody who's working in the ED, maybe doesn't want to scroll through ChartMax and 20 pages, we're able to get an easy answer. So this first pass, which is probably what you've all heard and seen about in the media, there are things that we potentially don't need to do, and these things are creeping into our reality.
Are you advancing on? Okay, this is what you need to advance for them to see it.
Okay.
Forget about that.
Okay. All right. So with all those things said, we potentially don't need to do a few of these things again, which is summarization of large texts. So if I work in legal, I have a huge contract and I have to summarize that to know what the contract terms are correct. Potentially don't have to do that. Education material, we potentially will write that itself, like you've seen. And then lots of boring kind of corporate stuff that is really tedious to do. And the computer can kind of help with that. A lot of you are already using it. A lot of people are already using it for like doing evals, doing policies. We encourage all of that stuff. Okay, make sure we're not kind of sharing corporate secrets out to ChatGPT because they are recording all that information. But generally, this is stuff that will just help us in our day-to-day lives. And many of us, I think 400 million daily users of ChatGPT at the moment, found a way to make that useful. But things kind of went further than this, and this is where some people kind of stopped really paying attention. But so in 2023, a new version of the brain was released. Most importantly, it could take a lot more input. So rather than just giving it a few sentences as a prompt, you could now give it 100 pages of medical records. And now we'll skip to this in a minute. You can now read it, 4 million words as a prompt. So you can give it the entire Harry Potter series just as the prompt, and then start asking questions. So the amount of information we can feed it increased. Just as importantly, we can now take images. We don't just have to limit it to words. Well, what do I mean by that? So the top slide here is take a picture and ask the question, can you give me a couple of meals I can make with this picture out of my refrigerator? Sure enough, it comes right back. Good. Okay. And sure enough, it comes right back with a refrigerator and says, okay, you can make yogurt parfait, carrot and hummus wrap. It's understood what's in the refrigerator.
Yes, you need to do both.
Oh, okay. So keep throwing challenges at me, see if we can do both of those. Okay, so I'm advancing 2 sets of slides. I think AI probably can't do this. So here's one other example for you. This was a French graduate level exam in science, and it fed it this graduate test question, which is some kind of physics written in French. The prompt was to figure it out in English. And so it understood the image, translated it from French, did the math, came up with the answer. Okay, so much more than just doing the text that you see. All right, so then we go a little bit further. OpenAI decides to release what they call plugins, and now they kind of give the ChatGPT access to do other things. And kind of why does this really matter? Imagine my example before, and I said people were passing notes under a door to someone to ask questions. Now you effectively got that person who's sitting in the dark room getting the notes passed to them. Now you've hooked them up to the internet, right? Now you've hooked them up to an EMR. Now you've hooked them up to a trading machine. So they've got access to do a lot more things. They can plug in the other events. And so the ChatGPT brain, when it was trained, didn't know about current events because it was only trained at a certain time. So it didn't know like who won the Oscars this year. Now we hook it up to the internet. It's able to Google on the internet and go get the answer. Right? So that's a very significant advancement in terms of connecting it to other things. So another example of this is we were able to I uploaded a file of every single badge swipe in the hospital for a day. Every single time you swipe your badge, we get a record of that, uploaded it into the computer, and just started asking it questions. Doesn't know anything about the data, just uploaded a file. So can you describe it for me? So it described all the file. And then I asked the question, can you analyze which doors are used most by which job type? Right. So went away. I didn't have to go programmatically do anything, just asked an English question. Clinical nurse accessing the med room, the top one. Kind of ironically, the second most accessed door is the staff physician going into the dining room. There are a lot of other swipes in there as well. And then importantly for me in IT, we wanted to find out, we asked the question, can you find any employees in the technology cost centers or with a technology job title that have used a door with the words med room in it? Which obviously we don't expect anyone in IT to be going to med rooms. And luckily that came back. Again, I didn't have to program this, didn't require any IT skills at all, just uploaded a spreadsheet, started asking questions. Okay, so that functionality is there today. And if you imagine if your job is to write financial reports, you might be a bit nervous about what the future holds for your job if I can just upload the financial statements and start asking questions. So in this case, with this add-in, we really kind of gave the brain access to other things, and including being able to do things. And we'll see this later on in terms of the EMR. This is where things get a little scary because now we're giving it a lot of access and it seems cool at the time, but maybe you might ask yourself later on, is this a good idea? So fast forward to about a year ago, we're now able to not just do images and text, but we're also able to do videos. And like I said, 10 million words being sent into it. So the entire works of an author, huge amounts of data being able to send in and have it be able to summarize or analyze it. So what do I mean by this? This is a completely generated AI video. None of this exists in real life. We just said a Chinese Lunar New Year celebration with a Chinese dragon. Everything in here is fake, right? So you're in the movie business, you may be a little concerned because they spend millions of dollars shooting scenes just like this. So another one, the prompt was historical footage of California during the gold rush, all completely made up. Okay, so it's able to understand images and process images. And you've got people who do B-roll for movies. If you've seen that kind of B-roll shots where they kind of fly over the canyon, taking pictures of the cars or whatever, they don't need to do that anymore. Okay, this is interesting improvements. So then let's fast forward a little bit further here. So the more recent advancement in 2024, OpenAI induces this model they call the O1. And what they really mean is that this has some ability to reason. And the best way you can think about this is in the past, whenever you asked it a question, it just blurted out the first thing it thought of, right? Now, it was right a lot of the time. We are maybe right. If you ask what's 2 + 2, just blurt out 4, and you're going to get 4 every single time. If you ask a really complicated question, you need to say, hold a minute, let me think about this. Let me go through some reasoning steps, try to figure it all out. And you can imagine for some things, that's a really big example. So what they were able to do, if I can advance this correctly, is take the base knowledge from the prior models, add a bunch of thinking time, and get to a much higher improvement in the knowledge base. So and sometimes now in these models, they're taking 30 to 40 seconds to think, which for them is a really long time, and they're deducing through a lot of facts. So they've taught it the ability to reason, not just the ability to have a lot of knowledge. So what does this mean? You've seen many of these benchmarks. I'm sure there's hundreds of these benchmarks out there that proves that the AI is able to where it scores on tests. You probably all know that it can get 95 on like the bar exam, on the medical exam, on all the exams. But now it's getting much further down the path, and we're looking at PhD level physics. And so you can see on that top right there on the PhD level physics, before it was scoring about a 60% pass rate. Now with this reasoning, it's getting to 92% of the problems are solved. Okay. So these problems, maybe like a lot of your medical problems where you've got a very complicated case and you need to really reason through all the paths, it's able to do much better at this work. And this is in the last 6 months. So then the most recent thing, and we're really caught up at this point, a model called DeepSeek is released in December 2024. You may have heard of this on the news. It got some attention. Effectively, what this was is an open source copy of that very advanced model I sent you before. You can download it and run it on your own computer. In fact, I have a computer at home that I'm running on that. I can disconnect the internet, use it as much as I like. It's completely disconnected. When that happened, NVIDIA, who's the people who make all the hardware for the big servers that sit in the cloud that run this, lost a ton of money in one day because everyone realized, boy, now that I can download this thing for free. I can run it on my own computer for my own usage. I maybe don't need OpenAI or NVIDIA or all these other companies. Now, reality is you do, but these kind of seismic shifts happen all the time. So that's kind of catching up to where the state of play in terms of AI is. The most common question, I guess, is, oh, what makes a mistake? I asked a question, made a mistake. Well, the way I have to think about it is it's not a database of facts, right? So if you had the chance to hire a Harvard law grad at your business, you'd probably jump at the chance. But that person coming out of law school might make a mistake, or they may ask them a question, they may answer it slightly differently than the person standing next to them. That doesn't mean to say we fire the Harvard grad. That just means they need more experience, right? And so that's the way I think about these models is it's just like you or I. We get asked a question, we give the best response to the best of our ability. The person next to us who's just as well educated maybe give a slightly different response, but we don't blindly trust everything. I don't ask Harvard grads to go and present to the board in the first week at the working for us. We wait a few years and let them get more experienced. What I was showing with that prior slide is these models are getting more and more experienced all the time. And so the chances for mistakes are less and less. But it's still there, and it's just like a human, just like we would make a mistake sometimes. So the last part here before we kind of go into the PCH side is, what does the physical world look like? What we've been talking about so far is kind of interacting with electronics, so text and images all via the computer. What does this really look like in the physical world? Well, many of you have probably seen like the Tesla Optimus bot and some of the robots that have been talked about. I think what happened is all the programmers came up with this technology and realized they put themselves out of a job. And so they're quickly pivoting to try to make sure now they address the physical world instead and distract everybody from the fact that you don't need programmers anymore. So this is a robot from Google, and they basically just loaded the brain into it, and they said, go pick the sponge up off the counter. Using its image processing, it was able to understand what a counter was, what a sponge was, and it understands how to move its body, and so it goes and picks the sponge up off the counter. In the old days, you'd have to program the robot to go 3 to the right, 1 forward, 1 backwards, lower the arm. You don't have to do that anymore. So let me give you an example here. But what's important to know here is no one's told it how to move a cup. It doesn't tell it to move. No one's remote controlling it. It has just been loaded with that brain I was telling you. It understands how to move its body and understand instructions, and it's just doing these things. It understands conceptually what a plate and a cup is and where they go. No one's told them you could have put that to the right and still would have been able to do it. Now, this was about a year ago. Notice it was a little slow. So this is the one that just came out a couple of days ago. Notice the robots are a bit more sophisticated looking now. So again, they've never seen any of this. No one is controlling them. They are just doing this by themselves. They are figuring out what the items are, where they are likely to go, and then they're handing them off and working together with each other. This is, again, no pre-programming with this. This is just the robots acting by themselves. Okay. And just watch where it puts the ketchup here, where it figures this out. Okay, so those are cool. Those robots likely, the prediction is next year, about $30,000, we'll be able to buy the first robot, probably in about 3 years from now, where those robots start to become a bit more commonplace at your home, potentially doing some basic tasks that you don't want to do. And then primarily in workplaces. So many of those robots will be deployed in factories to replace kind of those repetitive tasks. If you think about healthcare, a great example will be the lab, right? There's lots of repetitive tasks in the lab, lots of kind of processing what's going on. So again, we think in 3 to 4 years that will start to become part of the workforce in there. And these are, again, yes. That was based on the brain that had been programmed into them. So they could have access to the internet. There's no need, and they weren't using the internet to do that work. They basically been fed all that information. And just like we saw those previous examples with a picture of the refrigerator, they were able to use kind of the vision, the cameras, to deduce what was going on with the scene, process it through the brain, figure out where the fridge was, and do all those work. So they're doing it all on board in the robot. There's no external processing going on. It's all happening there right in the robot. In fact, the challenge with those robots, not to digress too far, is not the computer part of it, it's the degrees of motion in the fingers. So there's a huge industry right now on making the motors that are supple enough to do the very fine motor control. And there are even people making artificial sinew and muscles to try to simulate what we can do with our hands. That's the biggest control point at this point in time. But, things move on. They'll figure those problems. So we think about 2 or 3 years for that. So just kind of summarize this all up before we get into the PCH part. I keep this slide updated over the last 2.5 years as I've been doing this presentation about all the things that AI can do, and kind of very basic idea here of, all the things that go into the brain, the data inputs, what it's able to do. Obviously, it can't do smell and taste at this point, not particularly important for the work it's been tasked to do, but all the other things it's pretty much able to do. Put the data into the brain, and then in terms of data out and being able to do actions, we're getting from the bottom up there pretty far along. Emotion and feeling, There's really, it's potentially, you could argue it has that. It's just mimicking our own way that we do emotion and feeling. It's not having its own version of that, but it is mimicking the way we do it. But you can see most of those other actions it's now able to complete. So we're starting to get to a place where this is as functional as a human in terms of our inputs and outputs and processing. So with all of that, should we worry about it? Probably a little bit. You've heard a lot of this in the internet and the media. So the biggest problem probably is the ability for us to adapt to it, right? As it starts to take over and disrupt what we've done for many, many years ourselves, how is our society going to change? What if huge amounts of society are displaced out of their jobs? How is economies going to function, right? Because this probably leads to the amassing of wealth into a small group of people that own all the technology. You've got to worry about bad actors. You've got to maybe pause before we give it access to everything. People a bit worried about Elon and Doge getting access to all the federal information. What if the AI had access to that? Maybe it does already, who knows? But we may want to pause a little bit. And then right now, there is zero way to align it to a value structure. It does not have any ability to know good from bad inherently or morals. It just learns from what it's consumed. So when it reads Reddit or Twitter, that's what it's getting its morals from. That is the data that it's reading. And then the last thing, maybe you'll appreciate this as being physicians, is that once it can operate on its own brain and make improvements that it decides it needs to make, that's when it can be concerned. Because right now we are in control of the brain and the kind of skull is intact and it can't get in there, but maybe at some point it'll be able to. So what are we doing at PCH for this? Can you really benefit kind of this inside of PCH? Well, three kind of main areas. I'm going to quickly go through some screenshots here. Is visit transcription. I'm sure a lot of you are residents. You may have already been using third-party tools. I would plead with you, please do not use third-party tools on your phone to do visit transcription. The reason it's free is they're using that data to train the models, and that's a violation. I know you really want the functionality, but I'm saying it anyway. Please do not use third-party tools on your phone to do transcription. It is a HIPAA violation to do that. No matter what it says, the reason that they're giving it to you for free, because it costs them money, is they're using all the data from the visits to train the models. That's why that's what everybody wants right now, is the data. So I'm going to show you how you can do that very shortly here at PCH. We already have a lot of people using it. We've got some translation tools where you can translate from one language to the other. And then the third one is where we can go into ChartMax or SmartChart and have it summarize a document for you. So you got that 30-page fax from the primary care physician. You don't want to read the 30 pages of handwritten notes. It can go do that summarization for you. And then Vinay is going to talk through some more examples around research and data access and just at the very end here. So I'm going to try and do both of these very quickly. So here we're inside Equip. I'm just going to go through some screenshot what it looks like. You can see at the bottom right now, we have a new icon for a microphone. If you click on that, now you can start transcription. So you're in the room talking to the patient, you start the transcription. It's recording in the background the whole time. You don't need to do anything else. Now, let's say you've finished and you can see the transcription is slowly building up on the screen if you want to check it. It's listening to what's going on. It's figuring out who's the doctor, who's the patient, creating a script or a transcription of what the visit happened. And at the very end, you're now able to use this new AI button in Quip that allows you to ask questions about the transcription. So let's assume you finished the visit, the transcription's been captured, you didn't have to do anything but press the microphone. Now you get to ask it a bunch of questions. Okay, and these are prompts we've been working on with physicians here. So can you format and summarize the transcription? Could you generate a list of symptoms? Could you build a summary of the visit from the transcription? How about the HPI? Can you fill in my note for me? So we've got real physicians have been using this for about 4 or 5 months now to test it out, refine these prompts. But in this case, I asked it, format and summarize the transcription. So it went through and it did that formatting and summarization for me in that box on the right, bit like the Chat GPT. Then I said, can you generate an HPI from the visit? It was able to generate the HPI. You're able to copy and paste that over into the note once you've looked at it and decided it's what you want. And the final one is try to complete the note from the transcription. Able to do that, it actually reads through the Quip note, figure out the headings in the Quip note, looks at the transcription, figures out what was talked about in the transcription, and is able to complete parts of the note, right? And so in Quip there, you can see on the right-hand side the parts that were completed by the AI. It's not perfect. It is not going to fill out the whole note for you, but all that functionality I rushed through is all available, and that's just got approval for release to use by everybody. Yeah. Audio system on your computer, there's no need for M-Modal. M-Modal is still kind of a dictation tool. That's a separate process. Some people may prefer to use this, but this just picks up the mic on the computer. We actually have separate external mics that we'll be giving out to people if they want to use an external mic. We found in some cases in a bigger exam room, it's better. But yeah, it doesn't need anything from M-Modal. So a couple other things you can, if you're in a note and maybe some information came from the patient in Spanish, you can just right click it and you can translate it and it'll do that translation for you. You can also see with these prompts, if I've written a big amount of stuff and I want to put it into bullets or want to format, kind of change the structure of it, review it for clarity, summarize the text, it's able to do all of that kind of on the fly as well. And so here's an example of what it looks like when you say translate, it'll translate it. And I wrote this is not real. The patient said, but you can translate it for you between lots of different languages, not just Spanish and English. So that's already released. That's in the product right now. If you just right click on a text box. So this just got approved by legal. Obviously, there's lots of compliance concerns about its recording, and now you're going to trust it. So obviously, as physicians, you still have the responsibility, just like if you had a scribe, to read through what was put in there and make sure it's right. Think of it just like a scribe, like a virtual scribe. That's the best way I can give you to this. I will tell you from the use we've had, some people love it, some people don't like it. Right? It's just like anything else. It's just like dictation using M-Modal. Some people like it, some people don't. It's fine. You use it if you want to use it. If you don't want to use it, that's totally fine. We're seeing in the industry about 15% of providers end up carrying on using this. So it's not 100%. I can't tell you why that is, but we're not seeing like 100% of providers start it and carry on using it. But the people who like it love it, right? Like many things. And this will be rolling out probably in the next 4 weeks, right? So you'll get communication from IT will come and give you the little bit of training you need, although really it's just pressing the button. You can decide if you want the extra mic and then you just start using it. There's almost no training to be done. So let's go back in the next thing, which is summarization of documents. One thing we learned doing the transcription project was the myth that everything you need to put in a note is said in the visit, right? There's a lot of people out there in the IT industry trying to say, oh, well, just turn your phone on, capture everything in the listen to the visit, and it'll write the whole note for you. That's ridiculous, right? Not everything that's said in the visit is what you write in the note. You're looking at the past documents, you're looking at the lab results, you're looking at lots of other data points before you complete that note. So we quickly realized it was a myth. Maybe it happens in maybe in primary care or certain types of visits, everything's said, but for the most part, for specialty diseases, we're not saying everything. And in fact, it would be a bit weird if you had to like follow a script and say everything out loud. Everyone was like, why are you saying that, right? So what we realized is we needed to consider other prompts, other data sources, not just the transcription. And one of those very obvious data sources is all the things are in ChartMax or the scanned record. That's just text that needs to be considered when you're writing. So if you're doing a past medical history, maybe an easy way is to go out to the past medical records and summarize those. Maybe you want to ask a question that says, what all has happened since the last time I saw this patient? Can you summarize the surgeries that happened in the last year? What happened in the ED visits for the last 3 years? All those questions that you may ask, you may just want it to go do that summary for you. So what we were able to do here is go into Smart Chart, which is basically ChartMax. I assume that you know what this is. You use it regularly. So I just got a patient here I pulled up. I pulled up this other facility document, which is where we get the facts from the outside source. So this is a fax. And I clicked on this little AI summary, which is that little green button at the top right. And it goes out. It actually understands the image of what's been faxed in. It doesn't have to be a written note. And it goes out and provides the summary of what's gone on. Okay, this is, again, available. We've got a few people using that today in the hospital. So let's go look at another one. This was a consultation from endocrine. It was able to read through that. And you can see it's able to pull out the medications that were talked about, pull out the surgeries. And so you can kind of summarize all that information that's in there. And then one final one, there's an operative note, and it's able to, and you can see here, it's obviously not found any meds or diet or imaging, but it has pulled out the summary of what happened in the operation. So that's all working inside of Smart Chart. So next steps for that isn't available for everybody to use today because we're still in the kind of the testing of it. We've got a small group of physicians. If you're interested, you can contact Vinay and I, and we can add you into the small group of physicians, but we're really looking for people who use it on a regular basis. The thing we're working on now is not the ability to just summarize one document, but maybe summarize a whole collection of documents, right? So maybe there's a 5 surgeries, an ER note, a consultation, and the PCP thing, and you want it all summarized because you just want to know what's happened in the last year. Okay, so that's the piece. And then the last part of it is to make it available inside a Quip. So as you're writing your note, why make you jump out to Smart Chart? Just be able to go ask the question, can you summarize the last PCP documentation, and it summarize it for you right there in the note, and then you can use that piece of it you like, okay? With a reference to click back and see it. So hopefully those 2 things will be useful to you and practical. So at this point, I'm going to flip over to Vinay, and he's going to show you some of the stuff we're doing around data and research. So Vinay, I think I'm going to try and advance yours.
Can you hear me okay, David?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes. And let's test out the brand new AI feature that we programmed. If I say next, let's see if the slide goes to the next slide.
Well, actually, Vinay, he's saying, could you try sharing your own slides?
Okay, I can do that. Matt, is that okay? Sounds good?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so I'm going to do that, and let's give it a try.
If not, I'll be your AI assistant. That's fine.
Okay. How's this? You can see my screen?
No, go ahead. You can see mine, I think, at the moment. So.
Okay, so you
right.
cannot see my screen. I'm going to stop sharing. You want me to give it a
Hold
quick?
on, we got technical support. Hold on.
Okay, now share again, Vinay.
I'm going to do that. And
Okay, I think we're.
Yeah, okay, we're seeing it on the center screen.
okay, so give me a second, and here we go. Looks good.
Yep.
I knew John knew influential people in IT, and he could make this work. John, that's awesome. So all set to go?
Yep.
Yeah, so we are going to pick up the 2, going to be difficult following after that amazing presentation, but I'll give it a try. And I'm going to pick up the 2 vowels, and like vowels, AI is everywhere, right? Every word is without, you'd hardly see any words without vowels. And somehow those 2 vowels have also managed to creep into my last name, which was always AI over there. So this is the agenda for today. And before you get bewildered and you overwhelmed, it just highlights that AI in healthcare. Everything okay, guys?
Okay, it's okay on Zoom.
I'll follow him.
Okay,
Go ahead, Vinay.
okay, now it's good. Yes, it's good. Yes.
And cue me if it is not. So AI in healthcare is vast. It's there everywhere. And given the limitations of our talk today, we'll cover just a few areas and not all the areas that I mentioned that you saw. David already covered some interesting projects. I'm going to cover some other things that are well established, some other things that are in flight, cover a little bit of how AI is working in medical diagnosis, and then hopefully give you some tips and tricks how you can incorporate AI. So let's look at these 3 areas. And the first one that I wanted to show you is predicting no-shows. Now, you know, in an ambulatory clinic, you have scheduled, 10 to 12 patients a day. And your appointments, it takes about 3 to 4 months to get an appointment in neurology or genetics. And on a given day, if 1 or 2 or 3 of your patients are no-show, it is a big disservice to the other patients who are waiting. It is a big waste of time. And there are certain factors in patients' records, in their past records, in how far they stay, what transport they have, that this is amenable to some kind of prediction. So what you're seeing is a live email that goes out to endocrinology every morning at 7 o'clock. And it identifies if a physician has 2 or more patients, so you can see the yellow and the green colored physicians, who have more than a 60% chance of no-show based on various factors. And like David said, it is not 100% correct. It's like a weather forecast. But if you have 2 or 3 patients who show up on that list, then it is completely up to you if you want to schedule an extra patient on that. So quite a few divisions are using this in near real time. It works sometimes, it doesn't work the other time. Some physicians like it and some really find it useful. So this was prediction based on data, and I'll go over a little bit on how we are how the prediction works. What you're seeing over here is a well-established prediction model that David and the dietitians have worked on. And we are picking up malnutrition as the diagnosis to be predicted. You often see that children come in the hospital for many sick reasons. Malnutrition doesn't get the attention it needs. And so here we are trying to predict malnutrition. And just from the beginning of this year, from January, it has predicted 129 distinct patients. Good news is the majority of them were already identified in the chart. That's good. But the green part, about 34 were not identified. And it gives a probability anything greater than 60%, and you can see the probability ranging from 90, 80, 70, 60. And this was solid enough for the dietitians to say that let's go ahead and generate an automatic consult based on this. So this is not experimental. This has been established for a couple of years. Going from the diagnosis of malnutrition, we can predict other diagnoses, and you can see that various other diagnoses, whether it's cerebral palsy and feeding difficulties. Now, mind you, this is work in progress. It has to be validated. It is not as established as malnutrition, but the process that we are following is similar to this. And this will take some time, but just wanted to give you a flavor of what is in the works right now. And then the question is, what is the information that it is basing this prediction on? And it is the basic elements that are contained in our electronic medical record, as you can see on the bottom. So it's a conglomerate of various inputs that is taken to generate this prediction. So the first question that comes is, this sounds all very good, but it sounds like, black box. I mean, I'm not comfortable as a physician when you just throw, data at a machine and it's telling me if this patient has cerebral palsy or not. So let's look a little bit under the hood without going into the technical jargon. This was a sample data set that I downloaded from the web. This is not pediatric, this is an adult data set. But this is the beginning of how the process works. From this data set, what is important is these are patients who go on to develop diabetes. So it's very important to identify the label or the target. That's the term that is you are trying to predict who has diabetes, who doesn't have. And it is based on other variables such as age, race, hypertension, smoking, BMI. And this is the kind of data. So these are the variables that go, these are the X1, X2, X3 that go in predicting Y. And if you look at this, we are all familiar with what is linear regression. But if you're plotting somebody's Glasgow coma scale, the lower the coma scale, the poorer is the outcome, higher the scale. And this can generally be defined by a linear regression equation that you draw a line that goes through most spots. When the variables are multiple, it's not as simple as linear regression. It can be as complicated as this line, which is a parabolic format. And when you have multiple parameters, it may not even be in 2 dimensions. But the basic underlying thing is when you give enough data with variables, the underlying principle is Y is what you're trying to predict, whether it's malnutrition or no-shows or cerebral palsy. And that is dependent on a number of variables that the model tries to find a mathematical relationship. So that is the basic understanding of all the jargon that goes into the black box. And there is further terms that can add a complexity. And what I'm here to emphasize is that yes, unless you want to pursue a degree in this and do data science, you don't need to really understand everything. You have to understand some mathematical principles to feel comfortable with the prediction and know its limitations. So machine learning, yes, it is mathematical, but at the same time, it does involve a series of complex steps. And you divide the data from those 100,000 diabetic patients into 80% of the data on which you train the machine, and the 20% data you don't show it, and then you try to see how it is predicting. So there are quite a few steps. And often you need qualified data scientists working with clinicians to make this work. Now, data scientists takes time to train them, takes time to find talent, takes time to bring the team together. They are expensive. So many a times this is not an easy process that produces results within a couple of years. To address this, the approach we took at Phoenix Children's was to partner with a company called Data Robot. And what it does is it automates a significant portion of this pipeline, not everything else, but with a physician who is an expert in the domain and one of our data people, we can automate this process without having a team of 8 PhD scientists. This is what the format looks like. This is sample data trying to predict hospital readmission. And we are not the only ones using this product. Our top Fortune 500 companies and many of the leading hospitals are using this to kind of fast track our efforts in data science and artificial intelligence. You saw David mention the AI summarizer. So I wanted to present a different aspect of using AI. And from document summarizer, let's see what it can do to extract those nuggets and not just summarize. So here was an example. You guys are familiar with venous thromboembolism. It is a significant issue in our hospitalized patients. So it's identified as a hospital-acquired condition. There is good prophylaxis for it. We have to identify which patients we are going to use the prophylaxis for. But everything starts with identifying who has clots and who doesn't to know whether our prophylaxis is working, whether we selected the right patients. And while this may seem a simple question to answer, it is to answer where the clots are. It is typically in radiology reports and in problem list if it is entered correctly. But we know that problem lists are often not kept up to date. So how do we address this? To go to radiology reports, it's straightforward. You look at a report, look at whether it was normal and there was no thrombus seen, and that is a normal report. And this is a report where you see an occlusive thrombus. So one report at a time, you can easily identify yes or no clot. But when you're looking 3 years back, how do you process 24,000 radiology reports to identify which patients did have clot and which did not? So let's bring in a large language model, ChatGPT, to help our research assistant. And hopefully with ChatGPT, let's see if we can give our research assistant some superpowers. So you have heard the word prompt, which is a fancy word for, framing your question adequately. And it is a little bit more than simply asking Google, because now the power really enables you to ask complex questions. So here is it is a summary of the real prompt that we asked ChatGPT to process. And we asked ChatGPT that you are a research coordinator. This is into parentheses, my own paraphrasing, with superpowers, who is tasked to go through 23,000 actual radiology reports at Phoenix Children's. And you're going to detect the presence of a clot or a thrombus or occlusion. And when you find the clot, can you also let us know whether it was occlusive or non-occlusive, whether it was acute or chronic, and the location of the vessel. And then when you come back with those results, how are we going to believe that? Because you've heard that, GPTs and LLMs can hallucinate, like David said. So can you include a snippet from the original report so that we can validate and make sure? So this is what ChatGPT came back with. And we did some spot checking and it was spot on with 8% of those reports. So now for the first time, we know accurately which patients have clots and which patients do not. And it not only identified yes, no, but it also said occlusive, non-occlusive, and the 4 or 5 things, including the radiology snippet. So this is the actual snippet from the radiology. Then we said, can you take this snippet and create a diagram for me of where the obstruction is? And you saw the videos that David was able to generate. So this kind of diagram, it generated based on where the occlusion was. Now I'm remote, so I cannot see you, and I'm sure some of you may be paying attention to your phone. So those of you who were looking at your phone may have missed this, but I'm going back and then going forward. Did you notice something? The picture on the left-hand side was generated by ChatGPT in response to our specific report. The picture on the right-hand side is from Google. If you look at it, there is no anatomy ever that looks like this. Some of the names are also never heard of names of vessels. So this is the caution when we say that large language models make up things based on past data. So all sounds good, but you have to be careful. This is maturing technology, and you can see the diagram on the left mimics nothing that is seen in the human body, including the femur, which is an additional joint over here. So how can you guys keep up? You know, there's ChatGPT, and David mentioned DeepSeek and Perplexity. And so I'm going to draw your attention to 2 or 3 things over here. Perplexity is like ChatGPT, but it's like ChatGPT with being on steroids in some areas. It's really good for academic research. You can ask it questions just like ChatGPT. And what it does, and there are some advanced features, it comes back with answers with very good sources. So you can see the sources at the bottom. The sources are over here. You can click. And it is not based on its training that was completed, say, in December of last year. It looks not only at its data in the past, but it goes to the web and searches. So in academic areas, so Perplexity AI is the website. Go ahead and give it a try. This is something that is really, really powerful for medical applications. Think of it as like your powerful filing cabinet, note-taking, research, education. And let's see if I can show you something in less than a minute in live. So this is what I did. Let me expand this.
You won't be.
You guys can see it, right? Everything? Okay. So
They can see it online, they can't see it in the room. Fine.
Say that again, please.
They can see it online, they just can't see it in the room. Fine. Keep going, Renee.
Okay, so I'm going to talk you through. So what I did was I picked up 3 or 4 topics that I was interested in, and I made a notebook from those topics. And one of the topics was a Phoenix Children's pathway that some of you can see. It was pediatric paroxysmal sympathetic hyperactivity. And let me move the, yes. The second was CAR-T therapy. I mean, this is relatively new in the leukemia world, and you can add sources. So I picked up 3 or 4 sources from the web. I picked up Children's National Hospital had a very nice video. There was some from National Cancer Institute. And it takes your data, your sources, could be a website, could be a video, could be a Wikipedia article, could be an email, could be a copied and pasted text. Instantly it summarizes that text and lets you ask questions in real time. What is CAR-T therapy? What is it used for? And then with 1 or 2 clicks, you can create a FAQ from it. You can create a study guide. You can create a quiz. You can create a PowerPoint slide. And you can even create a 2-person realistic podcast. So I'm just going to play 30 seconds of this snippet, and David, let me know if you can hear it.
You're going to see more and more of in your practice CAR T-cell therapy.
Yeah, this one is really excited. You're basically turning a patient's immune system into this cancer-fighting machine.
Sounds pretty wild. We've got a ton of info to unpack from some of the top cancer centers out there. Places like Memorial Sloan Kettering Shop,
Called ILC. The choice of treatment and when we actually start it really depends on how severe the CRS is. And the individual patient, of course.
Right back to that ASTCT grading system.
Exactly. Got to use those tools.
This is really good stuff. Definitely making me think back to all those late night study sessions with Harriet Lane.
You and me both.
So we focused a lot on...
Could you guys hear that?
Yes. Yeah, we could. Yep.
Yes. So, I mean, how different is it to absorb a topic from a podcast And not only that, this is a new feature, while the podcast is playing, you can ask a question in near real
Hey,
time.
fellow residents, ready for another deep dive? Oh, wait, someone wants to join. Hey, go for it.
How long does it take for the overall treatment for CAR T cells?
That's a great question I can definitely address.
Yeah, that's super important for our listener to know.
Well, the Children's National Video mentioned a few key timeframes.
Okay, lay it on us.
They said the cell manufacturing process takes 4 to 6.
So you got a feel for where this can lead and the potential and the various applications you can do. At this stage, I'm going to stop and take questions and give you a couple of minutes to ask questions to David or myself.
And a couple that have been here in the chat for a while. So one from one of our neurologists, is the transcription that David Higginson talked about permanently stored?
So that at the moment, the transcription is stored alongside the note that you can pull it up in the past. Our legal and compliance department is deciding how long that's going to be stored for, and whether that's part of the discoverable medical record. So that's in discussion at the moment. But at the moment, it's included. What may happen is once the note is finalized, we may throw the transcription away because it's just a passive part of the note. It's not the final note itself. It's an important factor, but I would say let the legal and compliance people figure it out because they are all about this. This is a national type of thing that they're figuring out at the moment. So we are storing it, but of course the recording is not stored and nothing is in the cloud. It's all local.
Okay, very good. What a timely grand rounds. Okay, next one. Does the AI summary functionality only work for documents within our EHR? Would we be able to apply the tool to documents in other databases such as Estate, HIE, maybe through SCM, DB Motion?
So at the moment, it works with ChartMax. In the future, it definitely will be able to work with other sources if there's enough value, enough people want to use it. So I think we've got an upgrade coming to DB Motion that kind of does all of that automatically. But we're starting with ChartMax, so it's kind of run, walk, crawl. So we'll start there. But then realistically, it can take a document from anywhere, just like Vinay showed you. You can import it and do things with it. Just a note on Vinay's example on that notebook LM, you can access that. It is not HIPAA compliant. So use it all you like, just don't put real notes in there because we'll get sued. So, but all the stuff Vinay showed you, if we're trying to learn something and interact with it, I use it all the time as well for programming. So feel free, but just don't put business secrets or patient data in there.
David, and that was a good point. So I use educational materials. You can put all the policies and procedures and ask a question, who is allowed to do PICC lines and when do you change central line dressing? And your answers are at the tip of your fingers. So yes, do not use it for clinical patient related data. Thanks for the reminder.
Couple more quick from the chat and then we'll take one from the residents here and then we'll probably need to go. Okay. There's one person here who has their own ideas for AI and they want to know how they could work on developing their ideas. So maybe you can email Vinay and David online or offline. And then the other one is the underlying AI DeepSeek process being done on our servers?
So we're not using DeepSeek in production today. So what you saw, the examples with the transcription and with the ChartMax, we're using OpenAI at Microsoft Azure, which is a lot of words. Effectively, that means it's HIPAA compliant and the data can't be used for anything else. We have an experimental machine here at the hospital using DeepSeek. The advantage of DeepSeek is it's disconnected from the internet. So if the question was really, are you worried that DeepSeek came from China and all the data is going to go back from China? I'm not worried at all because when we use it, we unplug it from everything. It runs completely offline. But that's what the underlying question was. So safety and security is like the number one thing we're working on here. And I have both hands tied behind my back by legal and compliance. So you can be assured when we give it to you, it's got all of the guardrails already been put in place.
It's fascinating that we've been working on this grand rounds for 6 months or so. So all this stuff that is now coming to fruition, we didn't know it was going to be that way. So let's give a big applause to you guys for discussing. One question from the residents, and then we'll head out. Going once, going twice. Okay, go ahead, Chrissy.
So the way that it works is it takes the transcription that it captured during your visit and the information that was spoken, and it takes that and it summarizes or does work on that text. So it's not unique in that it's maybe unless the way you speak in that visit, but it's not looking at how you author your note and try to copy that. It's looking at what was said in the visit and summarizing it. In the future, could you take all of your notes, put them in a tool like Vinay had, and have it kind of write it in your style? Potentially. But our goal is not to train these models to be individualistic. It's really to take the knowledge of everybody. So to answer your question directly, it's not got anything to do with the way you practice medicine. It's based on the transcription. The one caveat is we do have the ability to fine tune these, what we call prompts, which is the way that we tell it to summarize by division. So if in a certain division, you need to highlight certain things, like Vinay showed the VTE example, where it was pulling out something very specifically, we can do that division by division. So maybe if you've got a big, long transcription or that note from the PCP, and you want to pull out things that are relevant to your division, you're going to be able to do that. So kind of a roundabout answer, I think.
Hey, John, can I just add one small comment?
Yes.
Somebody asked about ideas. They have ideas about AI, and that's really good, and a lot of ideas. But what we have found is it is not the technology that is the limitation. It's not the prediction of hospital readmission or acute kidney injury or who's going to have sepsis. What is challenging is having a workflow in place and an idea in place. What are you going to do with that prediction? Who is going to do what and when? And that, if you have your workflow well established, because many people rush into prediction and most of those fail into real practical applications because the process of taking action in response to the prediction has not been thought. So I would say 80-20, prediction is the 20 part. 80% is what are you going to do with it and how are you going to organize your workflow. So that's all from our end, and thank you guys for your time and attention.
And for those of you out in Zoom land who want the CME code, it's 48184, and Ozzy says it's in the chat too, so 48184. And if you want to get MOC credit, log on through Cloud CME, and there'll be a simple test, and then you'll get a MOC point. Okay.
Thank you.